creeping up, so I think we'll make a start. Good morning, welcome to our February webinar. My name's Emma O'Connor. For those who don't know me, I am a director in the employment group at Boys Turner and also head up our HR training academy. And those of you who've attended our events and webinars and listened to our podcasts will know that we like to bring you different topics, and we like to bring you other issues that maybe you haven't thought about as an organisation, or to really just encourage you to think about other topics that might be coming up on your HR agendas, and today is no exception. So we're going to be talking about financial well-being. Now, this webinar has actually been in the diary for the last 2 years, but unfortunately events sort of overtook what I wanted to talk about and the programme I wanted to bring you back in 2020 and in 2021. But we finally got here in 2022, and I am, thinking about where we are in terms of, the horror stories that we're hearing on the news about energy prices and inflation, petrol, diesel, cost of living more generally. And also if we think about the lockdowns, the ending of financial support, perhaps actually 2022 and talking about this now is perhaps more impactful. Will resonate more with our audience than perhaps it would have done in 2020. Why are we talking about it? Well, research from Neighbour, who are a financial institution, said that money worries cost the UK economy £120 billion. And in terms of lost hours of work, we're looking at 17.5 million lost hours. Most employers recognise that there is a link between financial well-being and productivity, and they found that 9 out of 10 employers said that financial concerns did have an impact on staff performance. So I think it is a topic that we're going to be seeing more and more. I think it's going to be one that does sort of come up more in terms of HR, what's going across your desk, but also how financial well-being fits within that sort of overall sphere of well-being more generally. And I'm really pleased to be joined today by Billy Moss, who is a financial advisor at Beaufort. So morning, Billy. Thank you so much for joining me at last.
Yeah, at last, definitely. Thank you very much for having me, Emma. We've had a long time to prepare.
We have had, this should go absolutely amazingly because, we've been planning for the last 2 years. Billy, just sort of explain to our audience about, who you are, what Beaufort do, but also just some sort of background about the types of clients that you sort of look after as well.
Sure. So as you say, I'm a financial advisor at Beaufort Financial. We're an independent financial advisory firm. We're based just outside of Reading, but now more than ever, we have clients all over the country. Our clients are a real mix of private individuals, business owners, and trustees. And for some of those business owners, we advise and implement pension schemes and employee benefits packages for them, and of course support them with any financial well-being initiatives that they may offer or are starting to offer.
So if we just have a little think about what Billy and I are going to be talking about today, well, we're going to be looking at what financial well-being is. And really, it is a broad church. There are so many different aspects to it and different views and areas. And what Billy and I want to do is just really sort of shine a light on it as a topic and maybe give you some tips and some ideas about how you might want to think about financial well-being, within your sort of, well-being strategies. So it is about raising awareness as a topic. But also, we're not here to sort of give advice. We're not talking about obviously any sort of financial products or anything like that. It really is just sort of, to raise awareness and shine a light on the topic. Please do pop questions and comments in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer them. But obviously we'll come back to you afterwards. But again, just to stress, it is an overview. We are live today. So again, please, bear with us with the tech, but also, just sort of pop things in the chat if you would like to. So we're looking at what financial well-being is, but also more importantly, what financial well-being is not. why should employers be looking at this as a topic? We're going to be looking at some research that's been undertaken by Money and Mental Health, and their sort of 7 practical steps that they gave to managing this, looking at what sorts of things you can do as an employer. I think most employers will be offering sort of be actually doing probably more than they think they're doing in terms of sort of raising awareness of financial well-being. So we'll give you some sort of tips about what you could maybe think about doing, and then we'll sort of give you our sort of final thoughts as well. So I suppose, if we think about financial well-being, really, it's interesting, isn't it? Because it's one of those topics that it really depends on who you are, your age, your background, where you are in terms of your sort of life, and also sort of your social situation as well. And I think from an employer's perspective, that's also true in terms of where you are on looking at your sort of well-being strategies. And it's also really important to think that, when we talk about financial well-being, it's a sort of a one size does not fit all. Many of you will have a well-being program where perhaps you're looking at sort of physical and mental health issues and championing that and sort of raising awareness. And it might be that you're looking at how can we include other issues within that well-being strategy, and how perhaps might focusing on financial well-being sort of fit within that overall message. And I mentioned Money and Mental Health. Now, this is a charity that's been set up by Martin Lewis, that some of you are probably aware of. And basically, evidence from their research suggests that employees who do have concerns about their financial situation, it can impact on both their mental health and their physical health. Many employees report sort of loss of sleep, concentration, reduced motivation. And, as we know, when we think about sort of physical and mental well-being, we know that has an impact on productivity and engagement, and also employees feeling that they can't talk to anybody. So really, at its minimum, financial well-being is about having an appreciation that external pressures and external issues can have an impact on your people at work. And then I suppose the next stage is to sort of think about the spectrum of financial well-being, and how perhaps we can be proactive as managers in terms of giving knowledge and sharing and maybe signposting. So if we look at the stats, there has been some research on this, and CIPD, as we all know, so they found that employers that have a health and well-being strategy, only 11% focused on financial well-being, compared with 57% that focused on mental well-being. And it'd be very interesting for those of you listening to think about actually what are you doing within your own strategies, and what other focuses are you looking at? So that was a review that was undertaken in November 2021. The Money Advice Service, they did some research as well, and they found that 39% of adults, which is 20.3 million, don't feel confident about managing their money. 11.5 million of us have less than £100 in savings, and nearly 9 million individuals would describe themselves as having serious debt issues. So Billy, if we sort of think about obviously those statistics there, if we think about some of the issues where we've got businesses who are perhaps focusing on the sort of the mental and the physical aspects of well-being, and maybe some that are feeling, some businesses that are feeling maybe a little bit apprehensive about looking at this as a topic, I wonder what your views are in terms of what financial well-being isn't, because I think it's really important that we focus on what it isn't, because I think that helps us understand what potentially it might look like for your business. I wonder if you can sort of share any thoughts on that.
Sure. I think you're absolutely right. I think there can be some hesitance from employers, when they start to think about the financial well-being, specifically of their employees. And part of that is, we see it fairly commonly, is that there's a perception that to improve the financial well-being of your workforce, you've just got to pay them loads more, and that it's going to be really, really expensive. So, the first thing is it's not that. And of course, paying fair wages is important, but try to think of it more as, enablement, enabling your workforce, as opposed to having to do anything, specifically for them, like paying them more. But it's also important to say that it's not you as an employer telling your employees, where to invest money, for their retirement, or, and it's certainly not you as an employer taking any responsibility for any of those longer term financial outcomes at all. So, of course, how you support the financial well-being of your own employees, is going to vary from business to business, depending on the makeup of your workforce. But generally encouraging staff to improve, the levels of their own financial capability, and enabling them to navigate any changes in their own financial circumstances when they occur, should definitely be beneficial for both parties. And as you said, we see employers focusing a lot more now on mental resilience, but building out the workforce's financial resilience, we think can be really important as well to supporting them overall.
Absolutely. And I think that there is certainly a role for the employer to play in this area. And I'm just sort of thinking about, looking at the clients that you're working with. I wonder whether you could maybe share some of their, what you're sort of hearing from your clients about how they're supporting their people, and maybe what financial well-being means to your clients.
Yeah, so we see our clients are individuals and employers, and we certainly we see a whole range of clients at the individual level, and they have a range of earnings and a range in the sort of level of their total wealth. And one thing that we definitely don't see is a perfect positive correlation between improved financial well-being and net worth. And we also see a lot of typically expenditure rises with income. We see that a lot as well. So to me, overall, it's financial well-being is how do you as an individual feel about your own financial situation. And I like to think of it in terms of what does being financially well look like? Well, it's essentially being free from any distress caused by issues regarding your finances, I think is the sort of optimal state to be in. And we definitely see, those that are freer and free completely from distress around their finances as people that have high levels of control and knowledge over their money and their finances. And so, for our clients that are employers, for them, it's about having a workforce that is free from distress, like I said, caused by their finances. And we see, most successfully, that's achieved through education and enablement rather than higher wages.
And I think from my perspective, so thinking about it in terms of from a sort of workforce and perspective, I think it's really about then taking that, okay, how do the individuals feel, but then looking at it from sort of a business perspective and saying, actually, how can we as an organization or as managers appreciate that actually, you've got this conflict sometimes between how people feel outside of work and then sort of bringing that into the workplace, and how we can appreciate that, support it, and then maybe taking that one stage further in terms of signposting and giving people, as you said, that sort of empowerment that they can sort of take control of things from themselves. I think absolutely you've got that sort of individual perspective, that's financial resilience, but also on top of that, how can employers firstly have an awareness of that and appreciate that, but then maybe that next step about what can they do to support it. And we hear a lot, don't we, about the war on talent and businesses finding it very difficult to recruit in certain sectors. And again, it's one of those areas where actually shining a light, can really sort of, set you apart in terms of, your sort of your market space and your employer space as well. How can you be that destination employer, and how can you, encourage people to join you? Because, again, if potentially you're not doing this, then your competitors might be. So again, it's about sort of looking at the business, but also sort of, how you are seen in the marketplace as well. So we've looked at obviously what financial wellbeing can encompass. We've looked at sort of what financial wellbeing isn't and won't be. Let's have a deeper dive now, Billy, and we'll have a look at these sort of 4 main areas that you've sort of shared with me. I'm wondering whether you can sort of just take us through, what these mean in terms of sort of a deeper dive.
Yeah, sure. And it's worth saying as well, this is a really big topic. There is more sort of scientific literature and study coming out about financial well-being at the moment. And so an agreed definition scientifically is starting to emerge. And I like this as a breakdown for it. And I think these 4 things can come together to combine, at the individual level again, to sort of how one actually feels overall, like I said. But I'll just run through them. So objective financial status. So what does that mean? This is the numbers, if you like. So it's your income, expenditure, assets and liabilities, totally unbiased and quantifiable, the quantifiable aspects of a person's economic position. And then subjective financial status. So this includes, how pleased or satisfied, happy, fortunate, you feel about your wealth and your financial position, or alternatively, it can be your concerns here, and concerns about the present or the near future, next month, or it can be worries about the future, your retirement in 25 years' time. And this, this varies again according to people's expectations, as well as the first point there, their objective financial position. Attitudes and knowledge. Again, sometimes these are labeled subjective as well. And these include sort of having a healthy and a positive attitude towards the use of credit and following a budget or a spending plan, and just in general, sort of being relatively risk averse to protect oneself. That one in particular is really interesting at the moment. The world is changing in lots of ways, and cryptocurrency, is a great example of something that's coming onto the lips of almost everybody we talk to. And being relatively risk averse, might be a good thing there. But and then lastly, financial behavior. So this is sort of how we manage the financial aspects of our life. So good practices here might include again, being sensible with credit cards, paying your bills on time so as to not incur penalties, not carrying big outstanding balances on credit cards and being penalized for that, overall sort of spending less than you earn, and reducing living expenses where you can, and also thinking about your longer term savings and retirement planning. So contributing an appropriate level to structures like pensions, etc. So that's a sort of good practice day to day, if you like, that last one.
So if we think about that, those sort of, breaking it down as to a topic, into sort of the 4 sort of topics there, I think the next point is obviously to look at, okay, well, why should employers be thinking about this? Why should it be something that they should be concerned about? And I talked about obviously sort of the raising awareness more generally, managers being aware that external issues can obviously have an impact or may have an impact on behaviour at work. Obviously thinking about it in terms of your overall well-being strategy and how it might fit into that, and maybe looking at what you're doing, what you might want to do, and using the tools and the resources that you have available. And those who have heard me talk previously, I'm very much a sort of being proactive as a manager, and very much looking at, know your people and know your teams, and being able to spot when something isn't quite right. Is there an emotional issue? Is there an appearance change? Is there a physical change? So again, having those conversations and having those sort of high trust relationships, where people can, kind of talk about these things, so we don't end up, in situations where people are sort of going off sick. Another point that I was really interested in when sort of researching about this, and I know Billy and I have sort of talked about as well, is the impact of financial well-being on our different generations. And probably for the first time, we've got managers who are managing 5, maybe 6 different generations. And it's really interesting, Billy, I think, to think about how those different needs can maybe compete with each other and maybe conflict with each other. I don't know, what's your view on the sort of the multi-generational angle?
Yeah, I mean, just looking at our own business, there are people of different ages across the company. There are, and with that comes different challenges. We're certainly seeing as well, more generally, people having to work longer. So this, the sort of age span is definitely going to increase. We talk a lot at the moment about 100-year life and planning for a 100-year life, which is a bit scary to some people individually, but we may all get there, whether you want to or not. But it's something that we all should be thinking about and should be planning for. And within that, some people may not want a 40-year retirement, so they will be working much later. And so, as an employer, you may have people who are fresh out of education, straight into sort of living on their own, for the first time, paying bills, and trying to balance the enjoyable life of a young adult with all the sort of boring stuff that comes with that as well, all the way through to people starting families and the challenges that come with childcare, and that's another cost that seems to be going through the roof. I know that from personal experience. And divorce unfortunately is becoming more and more common. That can be a massive shift in the personal finances of any individual, all the way through, like you said, to retirement and big changes there. And we're certainly not seeing a linear career like we used to, sort of work to 60, 65, stop one day, and then your pension starts getting paid the next day, and it's the same as what you earn. So the sort of death of the defined benefit pension is something that we've all got to plan for, and a sort of hybrid, half working, half retirement is something we're seeing a lot more of as well. So all of those things come with different challenges, and all of them can definitely affect the financial well-being and how you're feeling about your own financial situation a lot.
Absolutely. And also, impact upon any financial well-being strategy that an employer wants to think about as well, and thinking about how you can make that your program or your awareness or how you can make that sort of fit different people at different stages of their careers or their lives. And I think that's a really interesting one to think about in terms of maybe how you can scope your benefits but actually having that awareness, that a mindfulness that actually, if you are having conversations with people about, when they might be thinking about retiring, or if you're having conversations with people about, maybe when they start, having a think about how all of those other external issues can impact on their decision making or their well-being more generally. So I think that's where you've got that sort of balance between, awareness and obviously sort of support and signposting. And I think, one point, and I think you said it to me yesterday, is about employers getting employees not to just think about the present.
Yeah, I mean, we see that a lot sort of with our private clients as well as employers. There's often a focus on the present or the very, very near future. And it's, since auto enrollment came in, every employer, now these days does offer a pension, and that can feel sometimes like a tick box in terms of getting people to think about their future. But there can be as simple as just having a conversation, in team meetings, with your employees about planning for the future and being aware of potential, changes that are going to come up for people. And for the very youngest, that can actually have the biggest difference to their eventual future. Time invested in compound interest plays such a massive part in people's retirement planning, that the earlier people start doing it and see the importance of it, the greater the reward can be for them, and the security that they can have in the future from it can be huge. So strangely, the younger people are, the more they should think about their future to really benefit. But of course, we're all on a spectrum of that, and sort of halfway down that journey or somewhere else.
I think the employee engagement piece is really interesting as well, because you've got, so there's almost sort of two strands to that, I think, in that you've got employees feeling engaged and productive because they're in control, and they've got that ability to control their finances. So you've got that sort of employee engagement, but also the other side is that working in an environment and a workspace where employers are aware of these issues and do allow employees the opportunity to find out more, have their pensions advisor come in on a monthly or quarterly basis. But it might be that rather than just having someone come in on a monthly basis to do a one-to-one for those who want it, what about doing a kind of a workshop or a roadshow or a drop-in, so people can actually explain what this is, why you're paying a percentage of your money every month, what does salary sacrifice schemes mean. So it's that sort of knowledge imparting as well that I think can really help with that engagement message and support message, helping employees in the sort of the wider sense, as well as having an awareness of obviously people who do have issues and do need support. So I think, there are lots of ways that employers can really get the message out there quite easily. And I guess that sort of leads us nicely on to this, the sort of the 7 steps. Now, I mentioned to you before, this is from Money and Mental Health. This is a charity that's been doing some work in this area, and I think it's actually quite a useful website. Go and have a look, and they've sort of come up with sort of 7 steps, and I think we'll sort of go through them, Billy. And I think that sort of that short-term savings. What would be your sort of view on what that might look like?
Yeah, so when we're talking about enablement, we're thinking about what can we do as employers to make it easier for our employees to sort of do and implement the good practices that we talked about earlier. And one of the things that we definitely see, again, sort of for an individual level, is the benefit of automation. So particularly if we think about short-term savings and building up an emergency fund, which typically somewhere between 3 and 6 months income for most people, that's having that sort of money in the bank. There are services available where employees can sacrifice from their salary and it go into a savings account. It's usually free. The savings are accessible, whenever the employee needs it. But it's because it's automated and because it's coming off salary on payday and it's not hitting their bank account, and then they've got to make that decision whether to move it from their spending account into something else. You're just taking away the sort of number of options that somebody has to keep getting right. Basically, it's about automation, the benefits that can create.
Yeah, and using the technology and the services available to be able to do that as well. And when we talk about credit, we're taking employers kind of giving loans, but it's looking at things like season ticket loans. It's looking at things like travel more generally. I know that the employers run sort of cycle schemes, childcare as well. So there are options in terms of what can you do and what schemes are available to be able to offer your people. And money management as well, that's another big area where again we can use the technology, can't we, to sort of help in that sort of area.
Absolutely. That's a big one. Again, going back to that point about control and visibility and knowledge being really important in helping individuals improve their own financial well-being. There are a number of sort of fintech businesses now that are creating apps that amalgamate people's financial assets and then also have spending tracking and categorization in them. And they're relatively cost effective. They do have some cost attached to them, of course, but employers can either white label them themselves and pay for that, or they can make it available as a discount to their staff, or work with other financial services providers that have those in place already.
I think the next one here is this tackling stigma, and I think that's really important. When we talk about tackling stigma in terms of mental health, I think tackling the stigma in sort of financial health as well. I think it's one where people, it may happen when you least expect it. So I think it's about having that openness within organizations that people can go and talk to an individual, have access to support, whether that's through your EAP or whether through another source. So I think that's a really important part of this sort of these stages. We've talked about access to advice and support, haven't we? And I think that's and again, there are lots of ways and means that businesses can do that, whether they do that again through an EAP, whether they do that from an external provider, or whether they sort of have a sort of we talked in terms of sort of having panels and maybe having have it sort of somewhere where you've got access to, whether it's Citizens Advice Bureau or the numbers for sort of debt charities as well. I think there's sort of options, aren't there, around the sort of the signposting at that access point as well.
Definitely. Putting all of that in one place on somewhere that your employees can go to and find is super helpful. But then the panel is an interesting one. We said at the beginning employers aren't responsible or taking any longer term responsibility for the outcomes of specific financial advice that are given by other people, but it's possible to vet financial professionals, whether they're mortgage brokers or financial advisors, and be able to direct people to trusted advisors that they know are safe and where people are going to get good advice. And there's a whole range of how that can be done, whether it's paid for partly by the employer up to a certain point, on a time basis, for example, or simply because the financial services professionals, want to be in there helping people.
Absolutely. And I think that the next one comes up quite often and usually happens with regards to sort of expenses, in terms of when the employee is incurring expense and then being able to sort of reclaim that from the employer. And I think looking at your mechanisms, looking at ways that maybe you can get payments out faster to people. If there's been a payroll fail as well, can happen. Again, how can we sort of make sure that we can get money to people quickly to sort of stop credit cards having to be paid, but they haven't been paid their expenses. So some sort of practical and also being sympathetic in those situations as well. And the next one about ensure employees can afford to get better. Now, as we've said, this isn't about paying people more, but there are ways that employers can do that, and particularly through maybe their benefits packages that they offer. And it might be that might be the most sort of cost effective way of doing it. So thinking about your sort of sick pay policies, thinking about your family leave policies as well, because as I said, if you're not doing this, then your competitor isn't. Any thoughts on that last point about ensuring employees can afford to get better?
Yeah, so I think the sort of beginning point and the place where most employers are at the moment is an employee benefits package that at a minimum includes pension and then perhaps death in service, adding critical illness to that, and medical cover, allowing employees to include their children and their spouses, any other partners, in those policies can make a big difference as well. And those are very efficient ways for companies to support their their employees from, so to protect them from like the big stuff, really big, awful stuff. But I think, like as I say, I think we're starting to see that more as a sort of minimum, sort of structural support at the moment in particular. But moving forward, just starting that conversation with employees about other ways that they could be supported is definitely the beginning point.
So we've got our blank piece of paper, and we're going to start designing our well-being, our financial well-being strategy. Where do we start, and how do we start? And I think the first sort of starting point is, well, where are we as an organisation? What have we done in terms of sort of health and well-being more generally? Where are we in terms of what financial advice do we give? Where are we in terms of sort of benefits? Where are we in terms of sort of salary and salary bands? So the first part is always, isn't it, Billy, to sort of go, right, where are we? Because we need to know where we are, of course, before then we can move forward.
Absolutely. What are we doing right now? Where do we sit on the spectrum relative to other employers? And where do we sit in terms of that balance between the sort of cost benefit analysis? Obviously, as an employer, how much is this costing us? How much benefit are we getting for it from there?
Absolutely, and that's your business case as well, isn't it? What do we want? What do we want to achieve by this? Is it that we want to raise awareness for our leadership population, just to think, actually, be aware that to be proactive with our teams, to know our people, to think about issues and pressures outside of work and how that might impact in work. So is that where you are as an organization? Or actually, is our aims to have a network or a signposting page, or somewhere where we do sort of have workshops and roadshows? So what is it we want to achieve? What's the purpose of actually looking at financial well-being? And I think once you've sort of looked at that, and that will depend, won't it? It will depend where you are as an organisation, your size, your employee demographic as well. And I suppose once we've sort of gone through that process, the sort of the why are we doing this? Why do we want to do this? I think then it's looking at, okay, well, what resources do we have already at our disposal, and what might we need? And obviously we've sort of talked about how we might be able to use external support within that. And I'm just wondering, what else you're finding that employers are doing with regards to sort of external support.
We're seeing, like I said, we run clinics at the moment for a number of employers that we work with. What that looks like is we essentially go and sit in an office for a morning, and anybody that wants to come and talk to us can do. That they incur no charges or anything like that, and it's totally confidential. A bit like some of the sort of education and the courses we alluded to earlier. The uptake is really high. It's really, really high. Yeah. There's often a perception that seeing a financial advisor is only for really wealthy people, which is absolutely not the case. And so, that in its most simple form, we're definitely seeing that be more popular.
Oh, I think there is a real thirst for knowledge actually in this area.
Enormously. One of the
I really do. I think people are just more generally aware. We're seeing it more. We're hearing about it more, on the news, on the radio, but also we're feeling it as well. So it's not something that's kind of, it might happen tomorrow or, next year or 5-10 years. People are being impacted now. So I think there is a real appetite
absolutely. It affects everybody
to know about this. Yeah, absolutely. And also, from that, it's understanding, what our employees want as well. And, because there's no point saying we're going to do all these things, but actually it's not where people are at. So, ask people what they want. Do they want this? Do they need this? If they do, what sorts of things they want? Is it, as Billy suggested, sort of, clinics and drop-ins? Is it more sort of, we get our pension provider to come and give us a some sort of scenarios and to explain to you what your pension looks like, what's an annuity, all these things. I think we sort of expect people to know about these sorts of terms and concepts. But again, there's no harm in asking people what it is they're looking at, but also explain to them what financial well-being might look like as well, because I think it's like, well, what does it mean to us as employees as well? So it's that sort of knowledge as well as sort of asking people for their opinions, and make sure support is accessible in terms of the language. I think accessible in terms of who is it we're trying to target here. I think sometimes you might be better doing a sort of an introduction to, and then maybe breaking things down. But also, accessible in terms of, where your people are working. Is it going to be online? Are we going to do sort of, drop-in sessions? So thinking about how we can make that advice. And I think, the last point is who and how. How do we want to champion this? If we want to, if that's where we are, and that's kind of what we decide as part of our strategy, but also who. I wonder if you've got any thoughts on who might be that champion.
Yeah, definitely, and we've certainly seen as well that the sort of default would be that it's management, senior management, but actually, in terms of uptake, there may be individuals within your business that may not have the title or the sort of seniority on paper, but actually do command respect and are very trusted. They may be taking charge of other wellbeing initiatives, mental health initiatives, physical health initiatives. So that maybe there's an individual within your company that you can, and that wants to as well be a sort of confidential person that people can go to and just begin that conversation, and they can collate that feedback and take it back to management.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right, and I think there is a role for employers to play here, but also thinking about how you can incorporate messaging around financial financial resilience, control, enabling, how we can sort of incorporate that within the sort of the wellbeing strategy and the importance of that. And I think from my perspective, looking at this, I think it's really important for employers to think about, okay, where are we now in terms of what support do we give? What does our benefits package look like? Are we utilising the support that we have available from our providers to help our people? And I think, don't assume that your people know what it is they're paying into, or they've got money coming out of their pay packet. Don't assume that people understand what their pension might look like. And the point that just sort of quote Billy there about getting managers and getting employers to think about what's the end point going to look like there, rather than sort of thinking on the now. And I think once you've established where you are, I think it's really important to look at the why would we want to do this, and what are we hoping to achieve from it, and then obviously thinking about the how and the who. And I do think there isn't one size fits all. I think that all businesses will be different. You'll know your people and know what there is an appetite for. But I do think that people want to know about this topic, and what their pensions are, and why they're saving for retirement, and how little sort of simple tweaks in terms of contributions and what that might look like. So I think there is a real thirst out there from your people. And let's think about it as well in terms of how can we engage, how can we encourage productivity, how can we avoid people having issues at work, going off absent, but also how we can keep our people as well. All of these sort of things that we're sort of talking about, this offering more but with less. If you aren't doing this, then other employers will be. So I think it's really a good time to be focusing on this as a topic. Billy, what are your sort of final thoughts on financial well-being?
I think if you've come to this webinar, then you're ahead of a lot of employers already.
Absolutely.
And so, well done to you. But I think that's a big step. And then the next one is just start asking people, ask employees if it's something they think about. And, not in a personal way, you're not asking somebody if they've got how much debt they've got, but ask them about financial wellbeing in general and whether they would value any input, about any of the things we've talked about today.
Yeah, absolutely. Just before we close, just to sort of tell you about some other topics that we've got and some other sort of courses. We're running a directors health and safety course, so really a kind of a raising awareness course for our directors and our senior leaders. So I will be sending that out. Please do pass it on to your boards, to your directors. Really important topic. I'm running that with Ian Clements, who's the Managing Director of Quadriga Health and Safety. Massive experience, lots of different sectors. I really can't, sort of recommend that course enough to you and to your directors. So again, please do look out for that. And sort of continuing with this theme really about how sort of external issues can impact at work and how we can support our people. I'm going to be running a webinar with our family partner, Paul Linsell, looking at, again, those topics, those issues about how home life and how that can impact. So some really interesting thoughts that he's got on this as well. Billy, thank you so much for joining me today. We finally made it.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
So if anybody wants to get in touch, then please do so. I will send out Billy's details as well if anybody wants to hear about the work that Beaufort are doing with employers, particularly around their benefit packages as well. I always remember a funny story about a client who offered sort of flexible benefits, and all the new starters wanted shiny wheels on their car, and as best as they tried to get them to think about their pensions, it was all about the shiny wheels. But as Billy said, thank you so much, and you are ahead of the curve by even sort of dipping your toe into this as a topic. So hopefully we've been able to bust some myths about financial well-being and give you some ideas about how you might want to incorporate financial well-being within your overall well-being message. So thank you again for Billy for joining us today, and hope to see everybody next month for our March webinar. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.